For an industry looking for meat alternatives, there's a surprising number of meat lovers at the helm.
I love the taste, I love the texture, I love the experience. It's the resource consumption that I don't love.
Whether they're using mushrooms, plants or animal cells, there's no shortage of passion.
I've probably eaten more cultured meat than anyone in Australia and probably in the top 10 to 50 people on the planet.
As companies combine science and senses to try and create a mouthful that keeps meat eaters coming back for more.
The job that we do in here is trying to replicate that craving and that enjoyment that meat gives to us without the animals.
At a time when the industry has so far failed to live up to the hype.
I would say I'm absolutely guilty of expecting things to happen quicker than they are playing out, but my belief in the scale of the opportunity is unwavering.
Hello, I'm Kerry Staight, and I do eat meat. I'm also open to eating pretty much anything. And when it comes to experimenting with food, the alternative proteins industry is taking some big swings in very different directions after a tumultuous 12 months.
An abattoir may be an unusual place to start a story on protein alternatives, but just down the hall from its boning room, Brisbane-based meat processor Australian Country Choice is also making plant-based food.
We probably had to adjust mentally first as being very proud cattle farmers, feedlotters and meat processors as to bringing this product into our factory.
The family-owned company is among a growing number of meat processors to make that adjustment in recent years. Global giants JBS, Tyson Foods and Cargill and Australian-based Thomas Foods International have all invested in alternative proteins.
There's always someone in that family who doesn't have meat as a preference. So we just thought having this product in our stable of goods was just presenting more meal options.
While ACC is doing the manufacturing, the products have been developed by V2 Foods. V2 is a joint venture between Competitive Foods Australia, which owns Hungry Jack's, and the CSIRO's investment arm, Main Sequence Ventures. It's one of the first Australian companies to launch plant-based meat substitutes into the market.
There's an enormous opportunity to figure out how we're going to make enough food for the planet as the population grows, and meat is clearly an area where we need to just figure out how we can double the amount that we produce.
It's an opportunity many investors seized on. With an explosion of plant-based companies and products hitting the shelves and moving into meat aisles, pleasing shoppers like Kylie Wilson, who has been a vegan on and off for 20 years.
It's changed immensely, especially over the past 12 to 24 months. In the early days, like 5 years ago, the burgers were terrible. You'd really have to put extra stuff on them to make them taste good. These days, honestly, I don't think a meat eater could tell the difference.
While vegans have got companies like V2 off the ground, it is meat eaters they really want on side. And V2's Skye Anderson, who has moved from manufacturing meat to soy-based products, concedes replicating animal products without the animal isn't easy, especially beef.
How close do you reckon you are?
I think we're definitely on our way. Are we there? No. But we're definitely working hard in the background to get to that point where a meat eater will try our product and won't go back. They won't know the difference.
All right.
The texture's pretty good. I mean, you're right, you can definitely taste it's not a beef burger.
Getting the taste and texture right isn't the only challenge. The number of ingredients going in and their nutritional value are also under growing scrutiny.
Animal meat has an advantage there because we call all the ingredients that nature makes meat, and so it's a single product. We have to bring all those ingredients together and list them all one at a time.
Consumer dissatisfaction combined with a pandemic and high inflation have certainly taken the heat out of the market. Last year, stocks for some of the biggest brands like Beyond Meat and Impossible Foods dived, and meat giant JBS closed its US plant-based operation.
I think the industry had an incredibly high hype cycle, which has caused a whole bunch of problems because people had inflated expectations about what could actually be delivered. And I think that's very unfortunate for some of the leaders in the industry because they've become very big very, very quickly before the market's been quite ready for them.
There has also been speculation about V2's future after one of the founders left earlier this year and the company announced plans to close its Wodonga plant in Victoria, which makes ingredients for its products.
We wanted to play a material part in the emergence of a primary production industry here in Australia that goes farm to fork. We haven't given up entirely, but we can't take the full burden of delivering that capability to the Australian market at the moment.
So is the future of V2 in doubt?
Not at all. We're growing, and the way we will keep growing is we will get more and more nutritious. We will keep the prices down, whilst perhaps animal products will need to go up in price. And we'll make the whole experience better and better.
In Canberra is a company that's all about making the sensory experience better.
To me,
More pork to me.
More pork,
Yeah?
definitely. To me, it 100% smells like prosciutto.
Founded by former CSIRO lipid engineers, Nourish Ingredients is developing fats to add flavour to plant-based food.
I have a bit light note as well.
So the whole cooking experience is not yet meeting the satisfaction level, and that's because of the lack of the right types of fat that the industry is not yet able to find. So what's being used nowadays is coconut oil, and that doesn't behave like the animal fat does.
After identifying the fats they wanted in meat, they went looking for them in nature and struck gold after analysing fungal strains in soil.
We have analysed all of them and found the one that does actually produce the type of fat that's existing in a piece of meat. And if you go back to the science behind it, it comes from when the cattle feed into the grass. These fungal sources are the source of omega-6 that the feed would take from the soil.
The soil microbes are then fermented, much like brewing beer or wine. And it doesn't take long to grow enough fatty goodness to pack a punch.
So 60 hours is all you need to grow 3 kilo of biomass in a 25-litre jar, and that could sell to 300 kilograms of meat. So there's a lot that you could get from a 25-litre tank.
While a little goes a long way, the company is scaling up, as a growing number of plant-based food companies, including V2, come calling for this missing ingredient. For the company's resident chef, working in a lab instead of a restaurant pushes his skills in new directions.
As a chef, I know that fat is flavor. So working for a company that works with lipids and fats allows me to understand more their role in food, and allows me to be able to create better dishes using specifically the fatty compounds that are in animal products.
And while he is a meat lover, Ernesto believes what's going on in here will achieve far more than a tasty plate of bolognese.
You have high-end artisan products, and then you have industrially produced low-quality products, and I am 100% confident that we can tackle or replace those industrially produced low-quality products with plant-based solutions that are better for us, for the environment, and for the world as a whole.
An hour's drive north of Melbourne is another former chef in another test kitchen. Born in Texas, which is famous for its slow-cooked barbecues, Jim Fuller has eaten and worked with his fair share of meat. But this isn't meat. It's a substitute made from mushrooms. And Jim, who is also a mushroom scientist, is one of the founders of the company Fable Food that makes it.
They're so resource efficient. Like if I convert 1 hectare of land to growing mushrooms, I can get 35 tons of mushrooms per year. If I had that 1 hectare producing beef, I might get 250 or 300 kilos per year ongoing. And the land that I'm using, I don't need it to be anything special.
Of course, it's not as simple as serving up a plate of mushrooms, with a surprising first step.
All right, so this is a button mushroom.
Yes.
It is 90% water.
Okay.
Right? And in order to get this thing to be meaty, and that's the meat-like texture and taste, we need to boil them. I'm getting access to all the stuff that's on the inside of the cells by breaking down the cells uniformly. Now, you saw I only added a very small amount of water.
Why does breaking down that cell structure make it taste like meat?
It makes it taste like meat because mushrooms are more closely related to animals than they are to plants. And people who cook plant-based would logically know that you add something from the mushroom or fungi world to your plants to make them taste more meaty. That's because what's on the inside actually is full of glutamates. It's full of the stuff that's inside of traditional animal protein.
While he's cooking with button mushrooms today, the company generally uses the more fibrous shiitakes. And in his backyard is a good starting point for research and selective breeding. But to source commercial quantities, the company largely relies on the world's shiitake capital, China.
Our mission is to help to end industrial animal agriculture, and we need to do that by taking big swings. And if we were to use all of the shiitake grown in Australia right now, we wouldn't have enough even to cover our production as it is.
And to scale up what Jim whips up in his kitchen, Fable Food sends its mushrooms to Malaysia for processing.
We go to where the experience is, where the machines that already are doing it are, and we don't need to buy them.
In an industry where the nutritional value of ingredients is sometimes questioned, Jim Fuller is hoping consumers' familiarity with mushrooms will be more of a selling point than a deterrent as it expands.
People recognize that mushrooms have some air about them of being nutritionally sound or healthy for you in a way. And the only negative comes whenever somebody says, nah, don't like mushrooms, mate. I'll never eat a mushroom.
No such problem today.
You can never do this, gracefully on camera, can you?
Good luck. Tasting notes?
I would say that's meat.
Right.
I wouldn't have been able to pick the difference there, and I feel like I'm quite picky.
Fable sells its products mainly to the food service industry. And while investors aren't throwing around as much cash as they were, Fable has secured another $12 million, which will allow it to push into new markets like the US.
It is not as much as you would hope if you're going to come out and just try to make money off of things, but it is as much as you would hope if you want to have a progressing, ever better business. So it is as much as you'd want to hope for that, and it's nowhere near as bad as the fear.
What does your tenderloin do?
As alternative protein makers push forward, albeit at a slower pace, the beef industry is also investing in its future. And while meat is definitely the focus of this training workshop, substitutes are on the radar.
We don't want our animals over fat.
One sticking point is the labelling of some alternatives as a type of meat, prompting a Senate inquiry last year, which the federal government is yet to respond to.
The plant-based is really about trying to dupe people into buying something that it's not. It's not plant-based beef, because that doesn't make sense. That's like saying, I'm producing a Ford-based BMW. Well, it's not a BMW, it's actually a Ford. So just call it a Ford.
While John McKillop is pushing for changes to the labelling rules, he says finding alternatives to the protein he's passionate about is essential.
Livestock-based proteins supply about 25 to 30% of the world's protein. And we're almost at peak capacity in terms of our ability to keep supplying, more from a breeding point of view. So as we add another 2 or 3 billion people to the population, we're going to need to find alternative sources.
So this is our headquarters. This is where we do all of our research development, product development, early stage manufacturing and all of our taste tests. So
In Sydney is one alternative source that's a step closer to the real thing. George Pepu's company Vow grows meat from animal cells.
This is where we keep the seed stock of all the different cells that we're growing. We keep them frozen in liquid nitrogen just like this, and that allows us to preserve them for forever, essentially.
And how many different species do you actually have here?
We have around 50 species and many, many, many thousands of different cell lines that have come out of those different species.
So what type of species?
Everything from alpaca to kangaroo to buffalo to a number of different marine species like bluegill fathead minnow.
How do you collect that initial material?
For some of them, we go from a muscle biopsy, so taking a small piece of a dead animal and then separating out the cells that we want to use, the ones that repair muscle fat and connective tissue. That's all the stuff that we're really eating when we're eating meat. And for some species, we start with an egg, especially birds and reptiles.
And so to people who go, well, you still need dead animals to produce this,
So once we have a really high quality cell line that can grow, that can keep growing, we don't have to keep going back to that animal. We can essentially use these forever.
The former cook turned entrepreneur, who has also studied biochemistry, says some animal cells come with more flavour and fewer expectations than more familiar species.
If you taste a fish cell, it tastes like fish. If you taste a quail cell, it has that sort of rich umami that you'd expect in a poultry.
So what about cells that aren't giving you the goods?
We found that the cells of beef, chicken and pork were just not particularly easy to grow. Beef cells in particular are very, very challenging.
To make more cells, they're fed a liquid diet rich in sugars, salts and amino acids.
Unplant?
After opening this factory last year, the company is ramping up production from tens to hopefully hundreds of kilos over the coming months, despite the odd setback.
We made some stunningly stupid mistakes. We quite literally blew up bioreactors. We made every possible mistake in how you handle large-scale cell culture, but we're now at a point where we're able to operate that really quite smoothly and quite consistently.
So it's scaling up again, with a new factory being built next door, after the company secured around $75 million in funding.
So that will take you to a viable level, that one there.
But that's not good enough. We want to be the biggest food company ever.
There she is.
It's a lofty goal which will require plenty of tweaking in between. While making food from animal cells comes with authentic flavours, developing the right texture is trickier.
With minced products, I'd say I'm 90% happy there. With some of the whole cut products, I'd say 50%. We have a lot of work to go to get that to being, becoming a dinner plate staple for me. But that said, we went from 0 to 50% over about 3 months.
Its first commercial products will be made from cultured quail, with the initial focus on single species to get as many through the regulatory process as possible and test the market. But the long game is to mix and match.
Where we can take different cells from different species that have different flavour or nutrition or functional properties, bring them together into a single finished product that ends up delivering something that animals never could.
The mammoth meatball.
Val certainly isn't afraid to push boundaries, recently unveiling a massive meatball containing DNA of the extinct woolly mammoth.
Everything we've been working on at Vow has been about challenging what our meat can be in the future and challenging the perception that it's this very limited set of species that our ancestors domesticated. And we thought, what better way to showcase that than go and resurrect an extinct animal that no one's eaten for 10,000 years. So these are the same ones?
Yes, I got it too. Cheers.
While the meatball is more for the museum, the company is launching its cultured quail in fine dining restaurants this year.
It just kind of showcases it in the best
But
way.
this is not an experience you or I can have in Australia for now, with the company currently going through the regulatory approval process to sell what it makes locally. Instead, its products will initially appear on menus in Singapore, which is the first country to legalise the sale of cultured meat.
I think it's easy fixes. Yeah. It's processing fixes, which are always the easiest fixes. Yeah.
So to begin with, how much is it going to cost to eat it?
So at the moment, a couple of $100 per kilo, and by the end of this year, we're targeting under $100 per kilo. But by the end of the decade, our goal is to be the cheapest option in the supermarket, to be the cheapest way of producing protein.
Creating
At the Evoke AgTech conference in Adelaide, George joined other leaders in alternative proteins to discuss the opportunities and challenges ahead, including gaining acceptance in the market.
We're going to do this anywhere. We could be doing this in Singapore, we could be doing this in the US.
That's true.
And so if there isn't a will here, if there's a will to prevent us moving forward here, we're just going to pick up and just drop ourselves overseas.
In another room at Evoke, filled with innovative thinkers and start-up businesses,
so have you tasted this?
A steak-loving former livestock farmer is introducing an alternative protein he's developed with his wife, which he says can be efficiently produced in Australia from paddock to plate.
That's nice. Really good. We believe that if you can do it within Australia, let's do that within Australia. And our product naturally works in that way, that its supply chain is very simple. It is all available here, so no necessity to export our protein, only to have to import it again to produce a product.
Based on the outskirts of Melbourne, Eighth Day founder Roger Drew has been busy working behind the scenes on a protein made from lupins, while watching the recent rise and fall of meat alternatives play out.
In most instances, other products are the result of extraction of proteins and a whole heap of other ingredients, and then having to reformat them back together again. And not all of those processes can happen economically here in Australia. Whereas for us, because we don't extract anything from the seed, we're using the whole seed from the very beginning for both nutrition and for functionality. We don't have to then try to rebuild the protein at the end.
Lupins are an ancient legume, largely used as livestock feed in Australia. While some sweet varieties are also sold as snacks or baking ingredients for human consumption, it's unusual to see the seed being processed as a protein in its own right. But that's what Eighth Day is doing with its product, Lupine.
This process is not complicated, but there are particular elements to it that if you get it wrong, the whole thing falls apart.
With the number of ingredients and processes in some plant-based foods a turn-off, Roger hopes his relatively simple recipe will lead to success.
This is a moment of reset. Unless we get the next phase of alternative proteins in that right space, where it is affordable and it is good for people, then I think we're going to continue to struggle.
A lot of the magic happens in the fermenting room, where the lupin mix takes shape.
The fermentation does essentially three things. It will change the nature of the ingredients so that they are more bioavailable for us. It'll change the flavour of it to bring it to a really umami, almost a slightly meaty taste. And it'll also bind it together.
So we're having a taste, which I'm always up for, but are you focused on the end product that people are tasting?
No, we don't see ourselves as being a retail brand that you'll see our name on the shelf. We're about supplying good quality, clean product for food manufacturers to be able to further develop.
It's a lovely, pleasant taste, isn't it?
You sound surprised.
I am.
This year is a pivotal time for the company as it moves from R&D to entering the market. It's got the space and equipment to scale up. It now, like many in the industry, needs wary investors and consumers to take another look in what is likely to be a long game rather than a quick fix.
And the long game is that a large proportion of the protein that we grow on this planet has to come without legs, and it has to be sustainable, and that's not something that we can change overnight.
We are past the woohoo. We are sort of in that sort of, it's working.
As someone that loves eating meat, we may have a set of technologies that can make even better food, and the only way we're going to answer that question is by trying.
I can't see people changing what they eat. I can't see the population growth stopping anytime soon. I can't see climate problems going away, and so someone has to do something.